I think it's disrespectful to the victims what these people are doing. They live in their left and right world, and so they're like, if I can make it look like this guy is a member of the opposing side to me, it'll make my side look better. Meanwhile, he was just a crazy person. I'm not sure if he was left or right. I saw where he apparently is a fan of the Communist Manifesto and Mein Kampf. I've heard people say supposedly other people said he was a Tea Party guy, but apparently nobody has evidence of him attending Tea Parties. So they really are trying to use a tragedy to forward their own political purposes, and it's terrible.
That's absolutely right. I mean, the old Rahm Emanuel line is, "You never let a crisis go to waste." And unfortunately, we find that just in if you look at political history, when some of the biggest transgressions against liberty occur, it's as a result of a backlash of something that happens. There is a tremendous amount of pressure on politicians to quote-unquote do something. Of course, very rarely do people actually stop and take a long-term view of what they do in that period of crisis or whatever. But, as we mentioned just a few minutes ago, we've seen the call for a return to the fairness doctrine. And embedded in that is some kind of a call where the government would have some kind of role around determining what's acceptable free speech or not, what's acceptable political speech, what kind of political speech crosses the line. We mentioned James Clyburn, the congressman who is talking about this fairness doctrine and is even prepared to come to the floor with some provisions around what's acceptable political speech, what's not. Interestingly enough, his daughter is actually has a leadership position in the Federal Communications Commission. So isn't that an interesting, a very interesting dynamic? So we've talked about the fact that there's been this talk around muzzling speech, but now there's also talk about we need to revisit more regulations on handguns and limits on the type of ammunition that can be available for handguns and things along those lines. Your reaction to all that?
I really would be interested to see how the fairness doctrine is even, how you would even connect that to this item. It doesn't logic. You might as well be talking about the environmental regulation or whether insurance regulation. I don't get it. As far as handguns go, I feel that the more open you are with gun laws, the more safe in general you are. And I'm not saying that there's never going to be any violence, but I really think in general, the more people do own guns, the more they're open to open carry and open show. That's a reduction. When people don't rob the donut store, it's not because they're worried about paying lawyer fees. It's because they're worried that there's a guy with a gun in the donut store. And if someone comes into the Burger King and they see a gun and they were ready to rob it, it may deter them. And meanwhile, it's the Constitution. We're supposed to be allowed to have guns, so deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think that the point that's being made with the fairness doctrine is that if the fairness doctrine is enacted, basically a commentator espousing a particular point of view has to offer equal time to an opposing view, and the thought is that that would actually suppress the number of political commentators and people actually having talk radio shows, because complying with that regulation would be so burdensome that you would have less rhetoric and maybe less stations that are solely devoted to that. So.
That's okay. Well, that's not freedom. If it doesn't destroy all speech, I'll say as a party partisan with the Libertarian Party, I would love, and we actually, with the Alex Snicker campaign, we tricked Bubba the Love Sponge into interviewing Snicker. He didn't like Snicker, but he thought he was following the fairness doctrine. So
don't tell Bubba the Love Sponge. We need future interviews on his program, so don't tell him that. Just to wrap this topic up very quickly, Phil, obviously as libertarians, there are some of our beliefs and some of our principles that we borrow from the left. There are some that we borrow from the right. So obviously libertarians are not purely in the left camp, purely not in the right camp. We're kind of a hybrid. We borrow ideas from both sides. And so with that as a backdrop, as I peruse the internet and go to different websites and things along those lines, I visit some liberal sites, I visit some of the more conservative sites, and I find that things are of interest and value to me in the political talk on both sides. It's very interesting that both the left and the right feel that the media is in the other person's camp. The people on the right feel that the media is very biased toward liberal causes, but you go to a lot of the liberal websites, they feel like the right wing dominates the media and doesn't really get the message out. But hasn't it been very interesting to see how...
I agree with them, both of them.
But to me on this Gifford shooting, it has been very interesting to me to watch. Again, understand the human side of it and then making a human story out of it, but just the other ancillary stuff that goes along with it. All the stories on gun control, the Tea Party, the vitriol, the fact that it comes from the right, not from the left. That's basically been the message. I found some of the stations to be a little bit more responsible than others, have had a little bit more balanced reporting. For example, it seems to be that CNN has really gone out of their way to say there is there's no connection. No tangible connection right now between this guy and the Tea Party or any right-wing movement. There have been other stations and other broadcasters that haven't been as good about that. But I guess to me it's been a very, very quick rush to judgment and everybody lining up and singing the same song.
Yeah, and to me, when it comes to the media, and this is where people on the right and left get tricked, consistently, especially your broadcast medias, whatever is big government, they do support. It's really more they support authoritarianism and bigger government. Whoever's in power, they have the floor, and let's push that agenda. So it does, I mean, so to a certain extent, they are biased.
Good, absolutely. Well, again, obviously, just in closing this out, I'm sure you join me, and I'm sure everybody in the listening audience, in terms of wishing Congresswoman Giffords a speedy recovery, and obviously speedy recovery for all the other folks that were injured in that incident, and of course our condolences to the families of the victims of that incident in Tucson. All right, Phil, let's go ahead and switch gears. We got another overhead we're going to put up here, just talking very quickly about our election recap. In terms of the election recap, President Obama is on record as saying that he got a shellacking. I'm not sure that term has ever been used by a U.S. president before, but it certainly applies. Basically, the Republicans gained 64 House seats, 6 U.S. Senate seats, gained control of 17 state houses, nearly 700 seats in state legislatures across the country. Some Tea Party successes as well. We had Rand Paul be elected as senator in Kentucky. We had Nikki Haley, governor in South Carolina, the first woman of Indian descent to actually be elected at the federal level. And Ron Johnson, won his U.S. Senate seat in Wisconsin, displacing Russ Feingold, who, of course, has been around for a long time. Of course, there were also some notable Tea Party setbacks as well. Sharon Angle did not defeat Harry Reid out west in terms of the U.S. Senate race out there. So maybe a little bit of a mixed scorecard on an actual just categorizing Tea Party successes. But in terms of the Republican gains, Phil, we've certainly seen a lot of rhetoric around they're going to take a hard line on spending, they're going to go after Obamacare. They started to read the Constitution actually in the halls of Congress, probably the first time that's been heard in that body for a while. What's your take on all that? Do you have positive expectations of this? Do you think they're going to be able to see through some of the things they promised, or do you think that we're seeing a little bit of all show and no go?
The latter. I think some of the Tea Party people may think they're going to be different, but I think ultimately, even if they are people that value small government, their own party will sink their claws into them, and it'll be short-lived. And I think we've already seen a little bit of that. I've heard talks where really they're already backing off of how they're going to confront Obamacare, which I'm disappointed in. I'd like to see the whole thing gone. I don't value any one piece of that document. As far as the Tea Party goes, I mean, I don't know. A lot of people are like, we won and this is going to change. I've heard that in 1994 from the Republicans. I just don't buy it, and a lot of what they're actually saying isn't, from my perspective, isn't that small. Their own plan that they put out on why you should elect them, it just lessens the amount that they're going to grow government. It doesn't even stop or shrink government, so that's not good enough for me.